And now I want to welcome esteemed leaders who are presenting on our final panel of the day, Building a Just Transition. I want to thank all of the leaders who are presenting for your vital work and leadership. It's really quite a lineup here. We're going to be hearing first from Tasneem Essop, who is the Executive Director of Climate Action Network International from South Africa. Then we'll be hearing from Mela Chiponda, who is the Director of Shine Collab in Zimbabwe. Then we will be hearing from Ariel Deranger, who is Athabasca Chippewa First Nation. She's the President of Indigenous Climate Action and the 2024 Climate Breakthrough Award winner from Turtle Island, Canada. We will then be hearing from Rhoda Boateng, who is the Program Coordinator of Climate Change, Just Transition, and Occupational Safety and Health and the African Regional Organization of the International Trade Union Confederation from Togo. We will then be hearing from Maho Cerda. She is a Quechua woman, member of the Council of Convening, leader of the Economy and Community Development Area, member of the Quechua Peoples of Serena, Federation of Napo Indigenous Organizations from Ecuador. Then we'll be hearing from Aishka Najib. She is the Just Transition Lead and Campaign Coordinator, People's Climate Diplomacy Program, and she's from the United Arab Emirates. And I'm so thrilled to have all of you here. Each of you could talk for an hour and it would be amazing. So we're thrilled to have you. And I just wanted to kick off this session by saying a few words about the Just Transition, because sometimes people have different ideas about what that is. And there are lots of different interpretations of it. It's an evolving, dynamic framework that originated with the trade union movement in the 2010s to protect workers' rights and livelihoods during the shift to renewable energy and sustainable economies. It offers principles and strategies to guide the move away from extractive, polluting systems towards regenerative, community-centered, and ecologically sound economies. Of course, that definition in a good way has been expanded. So the Just Transition covers a wide range of issues, including centering frontline communities and building local economies that respect ecosystems and human rights, reduces resource use and waste, and moves beyond GDP-based measures of progress, and many more things. As a living framework, Just Transition continues to evolve in response to shifting political, social, and environmental landscapes. So to help with more framing, we wanted to offer WECAN's report, How Prioritizing Care Work Can Unlock a Just Transition for All, just as another way of looking at this. It's a report that demonstrates how investment in high-quality care jobs can help mitigate the worst impacts of the climate crisis, increase funding for public infrastructure, and support economies within a Just Transition framework, with a feminist perspective, and talking a lot about this unpaid care work that goes on that is at the heart of a lot of our economies. So central to all of our fossil fuel phase-out efforts is that the world needs to transition to renewable energy. However, we need to also transform the structures of power that preside over our energy systems to ensure that there is a just transition to a democratic and cooperative energy economy. Communities need to be included and have power over their energy systems. And as the global community navigates an energy transition, it's essential that solutions do not reproduce the same injustices of the fossil fuel economy, which prioritizes economic growth over human and environmental health. One glaring example is that we don't want to continue the same extractive colonial practices as the demands for minerals needed for renewable energy technologies grows exponentially. And to avoid this injustice and harm means incorporating a much deeper analysis, not only of a discussion of energy, but of extraction, power dynamics, and overconsumption by wealthy countries. So in light of the need for further analysis, WECAN has released a report called How Local Community Power is Central to a Just Renewable Energy Transition. So we'll put that in the chat, and we'll also be coming out with another report on mineral mining. When we go to Santa Marta, we will be releasing that report. This report and the one upcoming provides a climate justice framework for a just transition and empowers us, all of us, we the people in our communities, to localize power. We also know what doesn't work. false solutions like carbon offsets, unproven techno fixes, and market-based mechanisms that are pushed by fossil fuel companies, big banks, and complicit governments protect profits and delay real action. And these distractions do not cut emissions at the source. They don't deliver climate justice, and they only really deepen the crisis we're fighting to stop. And that's why our climate movements must continue to expose and shut down these false pathways, because if we don't, they will hijack our future and lock us into decades more of destruction. So we also know what does work: decentralized renewable energy, owned and managed by communities, just transition plans written with and by those who are impacted, rights of nature, indigenous rights, land back, and reparations for colonial damage, reforestation and agroecology movements that regenerate the earth while feeding families, policies rooted in climate reparations and care-based economies, not corporate greenwashing. And as we've been talking about today, a fast, fair, funded phase out of fossil fuels. And within all of this, a clear understanding that the leadership of women in all of their diversity across all sectors is not optional, it's essential. So with all of this in mind and kind of setting the tenor for this conversation, I'm very honored to hand over the floor to Tasneem Essop, who's been deeply engaged as a key leader organizing civil society for a long time, but also particularly in the upcoming conference in Colombia. And as I hand the floor over to her, I also want everyone to know that we'll be continuing to put links in the chat about how you can get involved and be participating in the conference in Colombia. And with that, Tasneem, please take the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Osprey, and greetings to everybody. I'm deeply honored to be part of this amazing assembly of women, building women's momentum for a just phase out of fossil fuels. Of course, we are gearing up for Santa Marta, the first international conference, engagement by governments and other stakeholders, civil society, etc., to discuss transitioning away from fossil fuels. This conference, of course, is long overdue, and we have to recognize is the result of all our collective efforts for decades and decades, and we've just seen this most inspiring video ahead of this panel discussion, decades-long fight to end the era of fossil fuels. While we did not get any outcome since this, the big victory that we achieved at COP28 in Dubai, where governments agreed to transition away from fossil fuels and did not implement any plans to do so, and in the COP in Belém, we did not manage to get any agreement again. We should not forget that, in fact, at the COP in Belém, we actually did have a very important victory. And that victory was also achieved off the back of massive collective power by movements across the world. Women, workers, indigenous people, environmental organization, frontline communities, youth, all of us collectively fought for an outcome in Belém on the just transition and also for a global mechanism on just transition so that we can have a global, cooperative, collaborative way of ensuring just transitions happen. That outcome was absolutely critical and far-reaching. It is one of those agreements reached that has far-reaching, rights-based language never seen before in any UNFCCC agreement. Recognizes the rights of indigenous people, Afro-descendants, recognizes the rights of women, etc., very strongly as critical players in the planning for just transitions. So let us also celebrate while we did not get, and we probably did not expect to get, an outcome on fossil fuel phase out in implementation, we did get the most critical framework to achieve a fossil fuel phase out, because without a just transition, we will not be able to have a just and equitable and funded and feminist phase out of fossil fuels. So I just wanted to put that into context as well. We are obviously, as you said, Osprey, we are very busy preparing for Santa Marta, CAN and DCJ, convening the widest, it's amazing, the widest preparation process by civil society across the board. We've got over 900 groups and networks in all the different sectors: Afro-descendants, indigenous peoples, workers, youth, women, feminists, etc., all coming together to prepare for Santa Marta. And it has just been the most inspiring process, because people are really excited to contribute to this first international conference on transitioning away from fossil fuels. So I do want to say that, we're inspired, we are excited, and we are getting ready for Santa Marta. We will be having a people summit in Santa Marta, and we are also planning for that. So please watch out for all of the information around that. So while we are all excited about this first opportunity to engage in very serious discussions about solutions and how we actually find those pathways to phase out fossil fuels, I think it is going to be important, however, for us to understand and recognize and acknowledge and prepare for this very sobering time that we are living through in the world. We head off to Santa Marta fully aware of the horrific context that we are living through today. This is a world where fossil fuels emerges yet again as a force of destruction, where an imperialist power can invade a sovereign country, kidnap its president, and take control of its oil. Where the same imperialist country can blockade a sovereign nation, already reeling from decades of embargo, and prevent access to the fuel that's much needed to survive. And in fact, we've just heard the news that in the ICU wards in the hospitals in Cuba, all of the patients have died. We live in a world where a country can launch an illegal act of aggression against another nation on all kinds of pretexts, against international law, and we are now experiencing the results of global disruption of energy markets, and yet again, it is ordinary people who are going to bear the worst impacts of that. And people are already feeling the impacts in terms of rising food prices, etc. We live in a world where over 2.5 years, we continue to witness a live stream genocide, fueled by nations who are complicit in still supplying an occupying regime with coal, oil, and gas. This death and destruction we are witnessing, is not an anomaly. It is the design. It is the design of the system that we are needing to address and dismantle. It is the natural progression of an imperialist capitalist system whose violence is now being laid bare for all to see. We, obviously, in our engagements in Santa Marta, where we are going to be looking at transitioning away from fossil fuels, and that transition would need to be just and equitable and managed with minimal disruption to societies, to economies, to peoples. However, in a world where everything is unpredictable, where we are witnessing huge disruptions to everything that we have actually held dear and took for granted, whether that is respect for international law, respect for democratic systems, respect for rights that we have taken for granted and fought for decades, respect for multilateral systems, all of these are being disrupted, dismantled, and challenged. It is a time like this when the conversations that we have about a just transition, the solutions we propose for that just transition, the ideas that we have about the future that we are transitioning towards, all of these would have to be located in the understanding of our histories, slavery, colonialism, all underpinned by systems of racism and patriarchy, and the realities of today. The genesis of where we are is obviously rooted in those histories. So we cannot achieve a managed transition if we do not understand that we have to also dismantle these systems and that we have to build our collective power to present our solutions, our ideas, what we need for the transition away from fossil fuels, but also understand that the fight continues, that we will never achieve all of that without dismantling the existing violent extractivist systems of imperialism. And so we need to go to Santa Marta with that in mind, with understanding that we also go to build our collective power, to get our inspiration from each other's struggles, that we stand shoulder to shoulder. Also, understanding our fight continues. We'll present proposals, but we will leave Santa Marta understanding that our fight to dismantle this extractivist system continues. Thank you very much, Osprey, and I look forward to hearing the fellow panelists as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tasneem, for your powerful comments and intervention. And yes, so important to understand, as we were talking about actually in the last panel, how important it is to understand that we're talking about a systemic change, and it starts with fossil fuels, but it is so much more. It is the system we've been living in for a very long time. So thank you for highlighting that. And also I wanted to thank you for highlighting the win that did happen at COP30, because that was just a huge effort that went on for years and years and years by civil society. And it was a big win on the just transition mechanism and giving us a framework for going into Santa Marta and other processes at the COP. And I think it would be good if we could put in the chat resources. I can, of course, think offhand about the blog that we wrote at the end of COP30 from WECAN, but there are other resources that people could put in the chat about the just transition victory that I think is important for people to learn about in this conversation. So thank you for that. And with that, I'm very excited to invite Mela to take the floor. Mela Chaponda, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Osprey. And I think now I have the task of speaking after Taz. So I'm just thinking about when we go to Santa Marta, what are we as feminists and particularly as ecofeminists? What are we really pushing for? How can we build a framework for a transition that is entirely just? And I just want to bring that to us as activists in the room and advocates in the room, that when we are talking about a just transition, the questions probably that we have to be asking ourselves is how we shift the energy system, and who defines the transition, and who benefits, who bears the cost, and what forms of life are centered and erased. And therefore, we need to be challenging the dominant, the technocratic, the extractive model of green transitions, and insist on justice, care, and redistribution at every level. So I have just been thinking through about what could be that pathway that is just for us to be informing our just transition, one that is rooted in African and global South struggles, one that moves towards a truly just energy transition. And I'm thinking about how we can reject the idea of energy systems that exist, whether the energy systems are fossil fuels driven or they are renewable energy, that they exist, they do not exist to serve the markets, profit, and GDP growth. And instead, it is asking, or we are asking ourselves, what energy systems can sustain life, can sustain our dignity and ecological balance. And therefore, that can only be done if we give priority to energy for care work, energy for our food systems, for water access, and community well-being. And we shift from energy access metrics towards energy justice and sufficiency, and that we resist commodification of nature. We are seeing this in the carbon markets, the language that is being used as we are moving towards towards energy transitions, that we are hearing about carbon markets, where forests are turned into offsets, and therefore the need to reframe energy from being a commodity to a commons that can sustain life. And I think our biggest push should be dismantling extractivism, even in the green form, that we work on exposing how the so-called green transition reproduces colonial extractivism. And I want to give the example of Zimbabwe, where we are seeing lithium extraction that is reproducing exactly the same violence, the same colonial mentality, the same grabbing that existed during the colonial times. We're seeing this in cobalt, the rare earth minerals across the continent. They are reproducing the same kind of violence that we had assumed that we have gone past. And therefore, we need to be challenging the sacrifice zones where communities, and particularly women in rural areas, the indigenous women, are bearing the disproportionate burden of environmental and social harm. And therefore, that means rejecting transitions that are built on violence, dispossession, and land grabs. And we demand accountability from corporations, from powerful states that are driving green extractivism. And I think we need to be thinking about a just transition that is not built on new forms of violence that we are seeing right now, the violence going on globally, that is all about energy systems, that we do not we do not move towards the new forms of the old violence. And I think the issue of centering women's leadership and collective power, that has been pushed for quite a bit. And we have seen this in Belém, where we have, for a change, something that we can work with. But here I want us to look at women as in using an intersectional lens, that we focus on women in the rural areas, indigenous women, the working class women, that we do not only look at them as beneficiaries, but as knowledge holders, as the system designers, that we invest in collective ownership models, the cooperative, the community trust, and recognize and resource the informal, the unpaid, and the care labor, that we shift power from elite, centralized actors to community-rooted leadership. Because when we hear our leaders talking about the issue of the distribution of energy, we often hear about national grids, and we are not hearing about the energy transition, creating an opportunity for those 600 million in Africa who are living without access to clean, affordable, and safe energy systems, that we advance energy democracy and localized systems. And I just want to finish off by talking about how the just transition should value care, should value interdependence, and focus on social reproduction as well. That when we look at the mainstream energy policy, it ignores care work. But as feminists, we are placing this at the center, that the design of energy systems should reduce women's labor burdens. For example, the clean cooking, the water pumping, and these are real issues in Africa and in the global South, and that we recognize the local economies that are sustained through care and not just production. And we embed well-being, we embed collective rearing into those transition processes, that we also employ methodologies such as feminist participatory action research. And I really would like for me to center the realities of communities, because that is where I'm coming from, and as well, having lived those realities where the production of knowledge is not transformed. And when we do not transform our knowledge systems, it means we are going to be creating the same system that marginalizes the voice, that marginalizes the realities, and continue to look at women only as beneficiaries, but and not as legitimate knowledge holders. And therefore, I'm looking at us working towards honoring the knowledge systems of women in communities, and as well that those kinds of knowledge systems are given space and are given priority, that we work on ensuring epistemic justice. Thank you so much. Over to you, Osprey.
Thank you so much, Amela, for your really important comments and intervention. And I really appreciate you highlighting that we want to ensure that we reject from a transition anything that harms our communities and harms our ecological systems, that we're very conscious of this, and also to really bring forward that this question of who's benefiting from the transition, but also seeing women in all of their diversity, not just what they're benefiting, but to be seen as knowledge holders, to be seen as leaders. I really appreciate you highlighting that as we frame up our approach to the just transition. Thank you so much for your work and for your comments here. And now I'm really glad to bring the conversation to Ariel Derringer. Thank you so much, Ariel, for joining us.
Thank you so much. Eklanete Denesotlaneta Erils Ekwehushe, Deranger Betsini Hisli. I just introduced myself in my Indigenous language. I come from the territories of Northern Alberta in so-called Canada, and I am a member of the Athabasca Chippewa First Nation and the founder and director of the Woven Project, as well as Indigenous Climate Action. I really want to say thank you to the previous speakers and Osprey and WECAN for bringing this important discussion to the forefront, particularly in the lead up to the conference in Santa Marta at the end of the month. I think that I want to reiterate a lot of what's already been said, but I also want to give a lot of reference and respect to the fact that this is a conversation that has been at the top of Indigenous peoples' movements within the conversations for climate justice for decades. We have been asking for the phase out and the transition away from fossil fuels since these discussions began in 1992 at the international level in the development of the UNFCCC. And just 2 years ago in October in Geneva, Indigenous peoples came together from all 7 sociocultural regions of the world to create what is now being known as the Just Transition Indigenous Peoples Perspective, Knowledge, and Lived Experiences for principles and protocols for a just transition. And at that, it is about, and I really want to thank Claudia in the comments who said we need to center Indigenous cosmovision and cosmology into these discussions, because that was a big tenet of this, that we need to center the interconnectedness and kinship with all living things on this planet as we develop our just transition strategies. And why is that so important? Why do we need to have this conversation that centers those interconnections and those values that Indigenous peoples globally hold, that connection to place, to territory, the sacredness of all living things, is that transitioning away from fossil fuels and extractive economies associated with it cannot be decoupled from the long history of displacement and genocide of Indigenous peoples. A lot of the current discourse on the phase out of fossil fuels has failed to confront the underlying colonial models, economic and environmental management, and they are driving climate and environmental collapse. These very systems are at the forefronts of the poly crisis that we're currently faced with, whether that's economic crisis, environmental crisis, humanitarian crises. These crises all come from this insatiable greed to develop resources. Right now, we've been driven by a system that is dominated by the oil and gas or petrostates, where transnational corporations are dictating the direction, scale, and speed of development that is expanding geopolitical conflicts, war, genocide, colonialism, neocolonialism, and employing frameworks that this is all under national security. And it is used to justify and increase access to and monopolization and control of all natural resources. So why is this such an important thing to be talking about when we talk about a just transition? Because right now, we need to broaden the scope of solutions to include Indigenous and human rights-based approaches that require states to enact and enforce clear and comprehensive regulatory frameworks to uphold bare minimum standards for respect for human and Indigenous rights, so we can shift perspectives from addressing a singular crisis, phase out of fossil fuels, reduction of emissions, whichever singularity we're trying to operate in, to building tangible steps for reimagining how to tackle the poly crisis we're currently operating within. By reducing the discourse to one centered around shifting energy systems from oil to gas to renewable technologies, as our previous speaker stated, we run the risk of continuing to perpetuate systems that are locked in extractivism and that continue to be used to justify the degradation of human rights and the rights of Indigenous peoples and environmental destruction. So we start to lose sight of the fundamental elements of human rights and the rights of people if we get locked up in these conversations around stabilizing economies and energy systems that are just perpetuating the status quo of colonial capitalism as the center of all things. Like, let's be real. Tasmin talked about it a lot. Like, we have state leaders that are just like throwing the guidebook out of the rule book out the window and committing genocides and just absolutely unethical things in the name of power, of control, and resources. And when we talk about that just transition one more time, I really want to state that in upholding not just Indigenous rights, but the principles of FPIC must be fully implemented. And I'm not just talking about operating and implementing Indigenous rights as a sort of side table thing, but at the center of this, that we have to include and recognize that Indigenous peoples' rights need to be implemented, not as simply a thing on the side, but at the center of all the things that we do. Indigenous peoples' lands and territories encompass about 20% of the world's surface of the world. And we are managing somewhere between, the debate is now between like 30, 60, 80% of the world's biodiversity. But what's even more alarming when we start to talk about the just transition away from fossil fuels is the reality is more than 54% of the global reserves for those energy transition minerals lie on or near Indigenous lands. And I'll put a link in the chat for this. So this is not just an issue of protecting Indigenous lands and territories. This now becomes a fight between the national security and economic prosperity of states and the livelihood and longevity and survival of Indigenous cultures. Indigenous peoples continue to be criminalized and vilified as being obstructors to progress. And so as we talk about a just transition and a phase out of fossil fuels, which we desperately need, we also need to have a conversation about what that truly means about continuing to do that in the name of perpetuating and standardizing colonial capitalism as the thing we are trying to protect as part of that transition. We need to be protecting the cosmological value systems that Indigenous peoples have of that interconnection with land, territory, place, river systems. Our non-human kin all have the same values and rights within our cultures. As my people, we are Dene Sotlene, we are Kaitale Dene Sotlene, we are also people of the Caribou, people of the Delta. We are inseparable from those places, and yet we live in a society that wants us to maintain a level of separability, siloing the issues, siloing people from our connections to our lands and territories. And what that does in the landscape of women's rights within this is it also perpetuates systems of patriarchy that decreases the value of women in societies and the contributions that we have in maintaining those centers for our people. So when we talk about respecting and holding Indigenous rights at the center of the conversations for a phase out of fossil fuels, we are also talking about addressing this from a multi-crisis, a poly-crisis, a meta-crisis, because it is inseparable. What happens to the lands and territories, whether that's conservation and biological diversity, whether this is a conversation around reduction of emissions, reducing greenhouse gas emissions under the UNFCCC, whether these are conversations under the human rights models, whether these are conversations on racial discrimination across all the board, Indigenous rights are asking and demanding that we reevaluate how we center our value systems in that interconnection. And this will allow us to really reframe our solutions frameworks to be much more broad and to have more respect for our lands and territories and the knowledge systems that we have maintained since time immemorial to keep these lands protected. This will allow us to reframe Indigenous peoples as criminals and obstructors to development and progress, to those that are grounding us in the reality that we are a part of a system that we cannot be disconnected from. So I really hope that as we move forward into the conversations in Santa Marta, that we can look at the full implementation of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples that can circumvent the status quo of allowing colonial governments to classify mining and extractive industries as a matter of national security and economic emergency. Historically, this has given these corporations and states the right to operate on Indigenous territories without our free, prior, and informed consent. We must ensure that our inherent roles and responsibilities, born from the divinity as Indigenous peoples to protect the spiritual, cultural, and social and economic health and well-being of our regions and all resources, from the womb of Mother Earth to the stars, is respected and supported through our own voices. That is a quote directly from the Indigenous peoples' principles and protocols for a just transition. All human rights instruments, from the guiding principles for corporations to the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the UN General Assembly Resolution on the Rights to Clean, Healthy, and Sustainable Environment, the OECD Guidelines for Multinational Enterprises on Responsible Business and Conduct, ILO 169, all serve as valuable foundations on which states can develop and implement such frameworks. But it requires political will, and it requires the pressure from people to demand and see Indigenous peoples as not just tokens, but as valuable people with valuable knowledge systems and rights to be held at the center to bring us forward into new pathways. I really hope that we can move forward within this discussion that doesn't sideline Indigenous peoples as simply as stakeholders and observers, but as real contributors at the table. Because for too long we've been held on the sidelines, and for too long we've been trying to enter into these spaces, demanding this. I think at this point, we are just enacting these things with or without these states, with or without the funding. And I hope that people will join us in Santa Marta, where we will also be holding an autonomous space for Indigenous peoples, participating in the civil society spaces, and bringing these issues to the tables in the high-level discussions. I really look forward to these discussions, and I really implore everyone to keep their minds on this as we're seeing these wars escalating that are driving states to continue to grasp at those last tenets of power in the petrostate, and they're going to apply that to a transition into a new energy model. So we must be careful of these false narratives that an energy transition is the salvation to a human rights crisis, because it is simply not. We must do this with real respect for both human and Indigenous rights and the rights of women and those that are most impacted by these crises. Thank you, Masicho.
Thank you so much, Ariel. Quite an extraordinary presentation. Thank you so much for connecting a lot of dots. And I just wanted to highlight that Ariel is also the founder of Woven, a project that she has put together to highlight a lot of these solutions from Indigenous peoples and the challenges they face. And I think woven is such a great word for you because of your great talent in weaving so many different pieces of information and knowledge together for us. So thank you for that. And to be sure, I just wanted to highlight and emphasize that what Ariel talked about regarding how Indigenous peoples for decades have been bringing forward this issue of not extraction of fossil fuels, not extracting minerals, not extracting and getting off an extractive economy. So this is not new, and I think we do need to continue to look to their leadership at this time and put front and center their voices in the discourse of the phase out as well as the just transition. And very much also in alignment, one of the reasons that, as I mentioned earlier, we're putting out a report right at Santa Marta around mining, around this issue of not sort of just blindly going into the renewable energy realm and what that means for human rights, Indigenous rights, land protection, biodiversity protection, that we're going to have to do it with a rights-based framework. And that's going to be a challenge because we're on this extractive economy. So, I think while we're very excited about going to Santa Marta and this momentum, this is a war zone. This is a battle, not the kind that we're seeing globally, but in terms of actually meeting the status quo, business as usual, the people who have power. This is not going to be an easy task, and we're going to need everyone. And as I mentioned at the end of this session, we'll be giving some different points about what people can do. But right now, I want to hand the floor over to our next speaker. I'm very honored to have with us Rhoda. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Oriel, and all the amazing speakers who have come before me. I think it's really a battlefront and the room is charged. I'm super excited to be with you this evening. I'm connecting from Togo in West Africa. It's pretty late here, but I'm very happy to be part of this important initiative. And I would like to applaud WECAN for this initiative, but then also the powerful sisters I'm honored to share this platform with, as well as the great and wonderful audience who have also connected from all over the world to join in this important session. I'd like to start off by saying power to the women who face the scavengers of environmental degradation, in addition to the dire conditions and inequalities we continuously face. Power to the global south, developing countries, small island states, who contributes minimally to global carbon emissions, yet are the most vulnerable to climate impacts. And even worse, are the victims of the politics of climate policy, where corporations and global leaders continue to shift the goalposts to what the science calls for. Power to the women who, despite the many difficult conditions, continue to rise above the odds to safeguarding our rights, protecting communities and ecosystems, biodiversities, and indeed society at large. We are indeed the bedrock of our societies, communities, and nations, and we carry a power that we must leverage today as we fight for a just and equitable transition. Comrades, trade unions applaud the gains from Belém, which came about from our collective action, as Tassim rightly mentioned in her remarks. As we prepare for Santa Marta and indeed Antalya also coming ahead, we are reminded of the importance of leveraging this collective power to challenge the forces that oppose us. Now, for ITUC Africa and ITUC, which represents trade unions and workers across the continent and across the world, our position on climate action is clear. We demand that all governments implement transformative policies to reverse the trend of climate change through decarbonization of all economic activities, including meeting and exceeding internationally agreed commitments and targets. Just transition, indeed, as was defined in the opening remarks, but also defined by the ILO guidelines and the fundamental principles and rights at work. And focusing on workers' decent work and quality jobs is essential to this process. Now, we would want to call on urgent action as we move ahead to Santa Marta. One, trade unions stress the urgency of tackling climate change in order to prevent widespread, grievous, and spiraling economic and occupational health and safety harms to workers around the world, and ultimately to save humanity and the biosphere and to create decent employment. Failure to act on climate action is a betrayal of workers, young people, and future generations, indigenous people, as we have just heard. Unions have moved the agenda with progress on just transition, negotiating the decarbonization of industries and cities while ensuring decent jobs in the transformation. We demand that all policymakers implement transformative policies to reverse the trend of climate through decarbonization of all economic activities, including meeting and exceeding internationally agreed commitments and targets. We insist that just transition with the full involvement of unions, without which climate change cannot be reversed, be centered to all efforts to tackle climate change. Climate action with just transition creates jobs and supports a skilled and educated workforce. Governments need to commit to work for the retention, reclamation, and expansion of public ownership of energy infrastructure and systems. All employers need to adopt zero carbon strategies in consultation with trade unions through collective bargaining and social dialogue. We call for the necessary levels of investments in skills and lifelong learning needed to ensure just transition. We insist on the importance of technology transfer and supportive provisions in grants to enable all countries to transform their economies and create decent jobs through just transition. We say global actions and resources for adopting to and mitigating the impacts of climate change and supporting just transition in the least wealthy and most vulnerable countries is crucial. Global trade will also play an important role in the development of any roadmap, with bilateral and multilateral agreements that chart out a credible, orderly, and mutually agreed transition pathways that safeguards the workforce and maintains the balance between countries. Now, as we wrap up and move towards Santa Marta, we say trade unions call for an end to wasteful and upwardly redistributive government subsidies to fossil fuel corporations and action to prevent their profiteering while ensuring protection of households against energy poverty. Instead of wasteful subsidies, these funds must be channeled into sustainable investments with public procurement supporting climate action and investors making their investments conditional on a just transition away from fossil fuels with employment guarantees. As we move ahead, trade unions are or trade unions stand ready to work with women, indigenous peoples, community groups, youth groups, etc. And we say it's important for us to center the voices and concerns of workers in all decisions and outcomes that come out. We stand ready and are committed in working with you, even as we move to Santa Marta, and we will join hands with all progressives as we move forward or we advance the cause for a just and equitable transition for workers, for their communities, and for societies. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rhoda Boateng. It's such an honor to have you here. And thank you for your excellent comments. And it's so important that we as a movement always include the trade unions. They're often left out of this discussion. And so it's really especially important to have you here today and really see all the alignment that we do have and how we can support each other in the different sectors in the ecosystem of pushing forward a true just transition. So thank you for that. And I also really appreciated your comments about not supporting wasteful subsidies, which are really pulling funds away from where they should go, and all of your great comments. But thank you so much for being here, and we look forward to working hand in hand with you in Santa Marta and with the trade unions. Thank you very much. And with that, I'd like to hand the floor to Majo Cerda. Thank you. And again, if I don't know if you're going to be speaking in English or Spanish, but we do have a translation opportunity with the little globe at the bottom of your screen. Majo, thank you.
Thank you, Osprey, and thank you everyone for staying here till this late. I know sometimes it's very hard for us, but in general, thank you to all my panelists, my fellow panelists, because I think they are bringing so much information and ways to take into advantage on each on our lands and territories to do more actions for us. I would like to change into Spanish because I would like to be brief. So
in this sense, I would like to speak very fast about what is happening in Ecuador, and I would like to give you some details. Something that Ariel said got to me because Ariel was in line to what I was reflecting about the situation in Ecuador. So 3 years ago, we won a referendum, and basically we said that we were going to leave oil on the underground in one of the most sacred territories of the indigenous people, which is located in the Amazon. At a national level, the referendum won, but so far the Ecuadorian government, they are not respecting it. And indeed, there are new oil extractions in the south of the Amazons. And this is related to what Ariel just said. The economical power is more powerful, but social and human capital in the rest of the world. This is not just in one small space, this happens in the whole world. Something that I'm curious about and that I would like to mention here is that I'm not just talking about just transition. We all agree that there needs to be a transition out from oil fuels. So before it was gas, and now we are talking about like metals and minerals, but so far they are not respecting what they are saying. And what we are seeing in the world is how this dynamic is changing. So we're going from exploiting petrol to exploiting different minerals. In Ecuador, there was an agreement between the United States and the government of Ecuador to exploit and to have an investment priority and to be able to buy some lands in Ecuador. And these lands are in indigenous peopled lands in Amazonian territories. That means that they are getting violence against nature rights, the indigenous people's rights. And the problem is that maybe we think that the global politics of the United States won't have an impact in into other countries like so directly, but it does has have a huge impact in the rest of the countries. So we need to acknowledge the influence that countries have. Those countries that have a political power and an economical power. This way, we will see that there is not a political will, because we're talking about a political will that they are not compelling with. So they need to find other alternatives. And when we talk about alternatives, of course, they always prioritize what those countries that demand more oil want. And this is a problem because we are not just talking about the minerals that we know, like lithium or coal. No, we are talking about rare elements. Those are minerals that are not easily found. Unfortunately, in indigenous territories, because those territories have been well conserved, those minerals are there. And so now we we are facing an increase of exploitation in our territories. And in that sense, I would like to make a reference about how we are divided in terms of rare elements and rare minerals. The main countries that have these economical powers in terms of rare minerals are Russia, China, and Brazil. Those are the countries that have biggest percentage at a global level. However, then there are other countries where there are small quantities in that do not have a good legislation in favor of indigenous countries. In those countries, investment companies, they are trying to find for these rare earth elements. I'm talking especially about Canada, because in Ecuador, we know that Canada is the biggest investor in the country. And I'm talking about any kind of mining, not only like gold mining. It is every single kind of mining. Canada is the main investor. And why am I establishing this difference? Because when we talk about rare earth elements, so rare earth elements are in those countries, but like the there are other rare elements that are in the south countries. They are not a direct competence due to the material or the concentration of minerals. But there are countries that just want to exploit any other country because at an international level, this can be competitive. And this is worrying Ecuador. As indigenous people, we are really worried about it. As I said, after signing the agreement with the United States, so over here in Ecuador, a reform of the constitution can be approved regarding the Mining and Energies Acts. And what does it mean? So that means that with this act, there will not be like really strict environmental licenses or to request the consensus of indigenous people, or these smaller rare elements, just like a small environmental authorization will be okay. And this is worrying because this is what is going to happen in other countries such as Venezuela or Peru, because over there are laws that are less strict in terms of environment and indigenous peoples. And this is getting the situation of us more complicated because so far we don't have the free, previous and informed consent allowed. That means that they can just exploit those resources as they want. And as I was saying, these worrying of law reforms are things that happen just in the South, in the global South, and in South America. Why is that? Because they want mining enterprise to get here. Because over here we have big reserve of rare minerals. And we don't only need to think about how these powers are structured, we also need to think about how easy they get to those spaces. We have the huge transnational, the huge mining enterprises. They just get to authorities at a national levels in South America. So we see that this is what they are doing against indigenous people, Afro communities, and in the society in general, economy is prioritized. So I would like to just give you this overview of the situation. What we need to do, it is to have an activation, like from a political and administrative point of view, because this is the way that they are getting in. They are just getting in through the political spaces so that they can change our laws and they can take our rights from us. And I would just like to give you this message. I would like to keep on supporting the voices of indigenous peoples, our colleagues of los pueblos de aislamiento voluntario. They will be in Santa Marta. We will have women's leaders, indigenous leaders that will not give up until the referendum that we won at a national level will be respected by the Ecuador government, and they need to respect our rights. So from this struggle, we are going to continue. This is going to be in Ecuador, in the whole Amazonian region, so that we will be able to achieve the just transition that we want to achieve. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Majo. Really appreciate your presentation and the hard work that you're doing, and also to convey what is happening in Ecuador and to your community. And we have been posting about your work in the chat, and we really look forward to working with you in Colombia on the ground and connecting with you and collaborating with you and helping you with your agenda and supporting you in any way we can. Yes, it's so important that we talk about exactly what's happening in Ecuador with the mining issue. So thank you for bringing our good attention to it. I also wanted to let our audience know that we know Majo in different contexts, and I also want to highlight and celebrate that she has also been working on a different kind of economy, really putting forward an indigenous economy and work around how we can get off the fossil fuel economy with land-based economies, and has been doing really beautiful work in that way. And this is also part of the just transition, is what we need to not do, which is to perpetuate this very dangerous extractive economy that is a colonial concept that is now perpetuated through capitalism, but also to look at the fact that we can have other kinds of exchange, other kinds of views of the economy. And this is really critical for us to learn from other models of economy. And this is something that we're really looking at and including in a lot of our discussions, and our policy briefs, to really introduce the ideas of getting off of GDP, of looking at circular economy, of looking at beyond growth economies, at degrowth, at looking at stopping overconsumption, of looking at the justice between the overconsumption of wealthy countries. All of this is tied into ending one thing and beginning a new economy. And actually, that new economy is quite old. It's the old forms of trading and other types of markets of exchange, that are based on planetary boundaries and not going beyond what communities can hold. So I wanted just to bring forward, there's also a lot of work the women on this panel are doing that is connected to a forward way of looking as well as what we must stop. And I really wanted to highlight that Maho's a really amazing leader in that space as well. Last but not least is a dear friend and colleague, Aishka, and I'd love to give you the floor to talk to us further about the just transition. Thank you, Aishka.
Thank you so much, Osprey. It is extremely not hard at all to come after the incredible, powerful women and feminists that just spoke before me. And I really feel the solidarity in the space and the room. And I want to thank WECAN from the bottom of my heart for convening such a space for us to sit together, strategize, and also hold space whilst the madness is happening around the world. And that being said, I really want to start with where I am right now. I'm speaking to you from the Swana region, Southwest Asia, North Africa, where war is not abstract. It is unfolding in real time. It has been terrifying to listen. It has become a terrifying routine to listen to the loud booms of the interception of missiles. And it is a bit ironic that as Tasneem was speaking as well, I heard a really loud boom. And it was quite frightening, and I was trying to ground myself in the space that we are in right now. And one thing that has become very clear very quickly is how deeply our world is still structured around fossil fuels. When oil corridors are disrupted and when supply chains are threatened, the impacts, the ripple effects are felt globally, right? Across economies, across food systems, and people's everyday lives. And I can't believe that it has taken the petrol prices increasing for some people to reach a level of humanity to recognize the atrocious war crimes that has been happening, especially in the Swana region, against brown bodies. And it really forces us to confront something that we don't say enough, which is that this is not just a climate crisis, but it is a political economy that is built on extraction, dependency, and conflict. And we know that many of the wars that we are witnessing historically and today are entangled with petropolitics, because fossil fuels are not just an energy source, right? They've never been just an energy source. They are power, they are leverage, and they are control, especially that the Western imperialist world is using. So when we talk about fossil fuel phase out, we cannot just reduce it to emissions. We are talking about dismantling a system that produces both the climate breakdown and the geopolitical instability that we're seeing in our world today. And that's why exactly just transition matters. These conversation matters. What we're going to do in Santa Marta matters. And I think it's also important for us to change the narrative and change the question that we are asking ourselves from not just what we are transitioning away from, but what are we transitioning into? And for whom is the transition happening, whether it is for communities, whether it's for private industries and the Western colonial states. And this also brings me to my second point, right? Where is that change happening and where is it still constrained? We saw that in COP28 from the mandate of the Sharm el-Sheikh implementation plan, just transition was negotiated as a standalone agenda item for the very first time. And we also got the outcome document, which is the UAE Just Transition Work Program. But the issue with the UAE Just Transition Work Program was that its only mandate was confined into having dialogues. And although dialogues are important to have that political conversations, we very well know that we cannot book club our way through a climate crisis. And that is when civil society came together and decided to take matters into our own hands, do the homework, do the strategy, and build something called the Global Just Transition Mechanism. It was actually last year, 2025, in February, that the Women and Gender constituency developed the blueprint of a Global Just Transition Mechanism, which was then taken up and shaped and strengthened by, rights holders collectively, from trade unions, indigenous peoples to Engo constituencies of our colleagues from CAN and DCJ, as well as the youth. And we really felt that, the power is also concentrated in our collective envisioning. We did not get the Bellem action mechanism because governments decided one day to wake up and be brave. That is not how it happened. This was not handed to us, right? It was built. It was built through long nights, through drafting submissions, developing the full architecture of the mechanism, and pushing these details into text and into the negotiations. And in our recent submission that the Women and Gender constituency prepared for paragraph 26 of decision of CMA 7 on the Just Transition Work Program, we really go further into outlining exactly how we want the Global Just Transition Mechanism, or BAM, to function, from having a coordination and stock taking element to knowledge sharing, to matchmaking support, and also establishing a global help desk, all designed to really move just transition from conversation to implementation. And what the mechanism does is very simple, but at the same time, it is also powerful because it creates the infrastructure for coordination, for knowledge, and for support. And this is very important because the just transition efforts right now in the world are so fragmented. It is happening in silos and its own echo chambers. We are not having cross collaboration, coordination, and community oriented discussion that includes rights holders such as feminists, youth, indigenous peoples, trade unions, workers, etc. And so the just transition mechanism really opens a corridor for real action. But at the same time, it's also important for us to be honest with ourselves and also discuss the limitations of spaces like the UNFCCC, right? Whilst we were able to achieve some bold visions within the UNFCCC, we know that these spaces are not designed to deliver justice at the pace that the world needs, because they are designed to deliver consensus. And this means double downing. This means dilution of ambition, even when we know that solutions already exist, even when we know that finance already exists. It is just going into the wrong things and the wrong hands. And this is why places like Santa Marta make sense and also matters, and same with the assembly, because they're so critical as it allows us to go further. It allows us to be bolder, and to define what a true just transition looks like to us, right? Beyond what is currently negotiable within the UN corridors. And as a part of this feminist thinking, I also wanted to welcome everyone, because we are going to host a feminist teach-in tomorrow, April 1st at 12 p.m. UTC, where we will break down the mechanism, share the tools, and open the space for collective learning and strategy. And of course, everyone is warmly invited. I will share the link down in the chat. And I also wanted to go back to what Mela was talking about, centering care work and care economy within the Just Transition global framework, because we know that women and gender diverse people carry and act as buffer systems when our economies are hit by climate disasters and destructions. And the work that care workers carry is so fundamental to making any other work possible. And initially, when we brought in the conversation about care work and care economy, it was only the feminists in this space. No one else was speaking about it. We were immediately shut down, right? We were shut down by UN actors, we were shut down by parties because, stating that there is no linkage between climate and care work, and it is not something to be spoken about within the UNFCCC framework. You can take it to the ILO or the labor conversation that is happening out there. But we were petty enough to not take those suggestions into hand, but to really push forward what we believed in, the strategy that we believed in the intersections of care work and climate justice. And we got care work for the first time ever recognized in the COP30 decision text. So this also goes back to civil society power. And I know I don't have that much time, so I will just end quickly by really building on that and saying that feminists are not new to this work. We have been building the foundations of just transition long before it even became a formal agenda item, right? Through care economies, through community resilience, and through resistance to extractive systems. And the same systems that inflict violence on women's bodies are the same systems that inflict violence on planet and the planetary boundaries. So as feminists, we're also not just asking for a so-called seat at the table or to just be in the room, but rather we are the ones bringing the solutions. We are the ones bringing strategies and the system change. So when we talk about fossil fuels, when we talk about just transition, we need to recognize that feminists are already shaping what comes next. So if we are really serious about the just transition solutions that we are collectively building, it is important that feminist leadership is not considered as optional, but as a central driver to the collective work that we're doing. And I will end it there. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Aishka, for being with us. I just wanted to really appreciate your intervention and all of the speakers on this panel for your extraordinary, important conversation as we head into Santa Marta and beyond. I mean, this work has been going on before, and it's going to happen in Santa Marta, and it's going to continue, as we've been saying. But I particularly, Aishka, wanted to thank you for joining us, given the stressful situation you're in. Having bombs going off around you is no small matter. And I want to personally send you good thoughts for safety and well-being, most especially. Truly, truly, we love you and we want you and your loved ones cared for, and we want these wars over. I don't know what else to say. They have to stop. It's insane. So we wish you well. And also, I also want to acknowledge Aishka because we've been talking about architects, women as architects of solution. Aishka has been central to being an architect of this just transition mechanism, working with the women and gender constituency, and has done phenomenal work at an extraordinarily detailed level, those kinds of things where you're up all night on your computer figuring out some nuanced, wonky policy interpretation so that you can convey what it is that we're wanting to see happen within these very challenging government spaces. So I just wanted to really give you a shout out for your labor and your intelligence and knowledge that you bring to this very moment. And so with that, we are going to close this panel. Again, I want to thank all of the presenters for truly an extraordinary look into the just transition framework, what we're dealing with, what we're wrestling for, what our hopes are. And I sort of just wanted to close with a thought about the just transition, which is, I'm looking at it as both our resistance, but also our imagination and courage. It's a form of resistance, but it's also our imagination of what's to come and the courage to pick that up and go forward. And I really thank you all for your imagination and courage and persistence that Indigenous people, Afro-descendant people, the labor unions, the women, the feminists have been doing for a very long time. It is time for our voices to be heard in implementation. And speaking of that, I wanted to mention right now we found out that there are 680,000, you got that right, 680,000 viewers tuning in on the live stream to these sessions that we're hosting today on the Assembly. So we're getting our word out there, and let's keep going. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and close the session. Thank you so much to all the presenters. And now we have the last part. I know we're running a little bit over time. We just have a few more elements. We have one final intervention, and then we're going to close with some action steps. For those of you who need to go or are tuning in and out, we will be having this live stream posted. It's being recorded, and we will be sharing out also the chat and the action steps and everything. So don't worry, you won't miss out. We will be doing follow-up and ensure that people have the information and that you have access to this on YouTube and on social media channels. So thank you. So we're honored for our final intervention, which is from a award-winning actress, Alysia Reiner. You may recognize her from Orange is the New Black or other shows. She's also a devoted mother, volunteer firefighter, singer, and outspoken environmentalist. And she's been a fossil fuel treaty champion from the very beginning. And we wanted to include her voice because, again, we've been talking about collective power, building out our ecosystem, reaching out to other spaces. And so for this, we're very thankful to Alysia for joining us and sharing a message with us. Thank you, Alysia.
Hi, guys. Thank you so much for having me. I am so honored to stand here among some of my fellow dandelions and heroes like Mary Robinson and our fearless leader, Zipporah. I am so moved to be part of this extraordinary group of women moving our world to a better place. I want to share a passage from the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty Artist Letter, which I helped craft and will be announced soon. We are artists, musicians, performers, poets, filmmakers, dancers, writers, and creators. We are storytellers and dreamers. We are the messengers of emotion and the amplifiers of hope. And we are adding our voices, loud, clear, unrelenting, to the global call for a fossil fuel treaty. That is why I am here. You just heard from visionaries about what a just transition looks like. As an artist, it is my calling to be a storyteller of possible futures and help us all rise together. We are fed dystopias left, right, and center, right? From the news to certain political leadership, social media, but together we can tell and live into a new story, a story of ending extraction, both of fossil fuels and how we treat fellow human beings. A story of 100% clean energy and a healthier planet. Together, we can tell a new story. We can write a new story. Now, I am part of Project Dandelion, and if you have not officially been pinned as a dandelion, I am virtually pinning you all right now. The idea of being a dandelion is to be part of a galvanization of climate passionate women, acknowledging we are all together the seeds and roots, the family of women, ensuring the climate protection and prosperity of this planet. That together we can do what I cannot do alone. Or, in the words of Margaret Mead, one of my favorite quotes of all time, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed, I'm adding particularly female citizens, can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. I think as women, we have the ability to hold multiple complex truths. We can live in this moment with its uncertainty and discomfort and let its injustice and inequities inspire us and be the fire that leads to new truths that can be born like a phoenix rising from the ashes. I want to thank you all so much for being here, for committing your time and energy and creativity and communities. Thank you for signing the treaty and sharing the treaty worldwide so someday we can all proudly say, I helped create a cleaner, greener, safer world for all.
Thank you so much. We're so glad to have everyone here today for all of the messages and great words that everyone has spoken here. And for the final segment of our assembly, as I've been saying, we want to leave you with some actions, all of which will be posted in the chat, and we'll share them out through our different social media networks as well. First, you can endorse the Fossil Fuel Treaty and join the global effort to phase out fossil fuels. More than 1 million individuals around the world have already joined the call for a fossil fuel treaty. So it's not just for governments, though obviously we want governments who are engaged. It's for individuals, civil society organizations, indigenous nations, scientists, academics, business owners, health professionals, institutions. Everyone can join this call for a fossil fuel treaty, which will be one of the proposals that is brought to Santa Marta for governments to review. So we'll put that link into the chat. The second action, a call for bold and transformative government action in Colombia. So again, as you've been hearing over the last several hours, a lot of the action that's needed has to be driven by civil society. It has to be driven by the front lines, by indigenous people, by women and feminists, by the labor unions. We need to be able to state and direct what is going on and be strong about that. And as has been mentioned, this conference is going on from all week long, but the government portion is April 28th and 29th. And you're welcome to use a social media post that we've put together to call for governments to end the era of fossil fuels and build a healthy and just future for all generations. You can, of course, create your own, but we have created some social media posts and graphics for you so that we can get the message out there as a collective call for governments to take strong and bold action at the conference in Santa Marta. Third, you're welcome to join WECAN's Braiding Roots for Climate Justice What's Up group to stay connected around climate justice work. And we created this space, which has been evolving since a previous assembly we put together. And it's a space for women in all of their diversity and allies far and wide working at the intersection of climate justice and gender equity. So whether you're new to advocacy work, furthering your frontline leadership, or are an expert in your field, this is an online space for everyone to come together, cross-pollinate ideas, learn and grow from one another. And it's been really an exciting platform. A lot of us have been sharing reports or campaigns and being together in a collective space for ongoing communication. The community is designed to carry forward relationships, ideas, and collaboration from weekend events. And everyone is sharing their own work from their own organizations. So please go ahead and see that link in the chat to participate in the WhatsApp group. And then finally, you can find local mobilizations and more ideas for taking action in the lead up to the Santa Marta conference. Right now, we see there's organizing to join one of more than 1,000 satellite events globally leading up to the first conference on transitioning away from fossil fuels in April. So there's already a lot of activation, and you can check out the website that we're going to be leaving a link for in the chat that are ways for you to participate in ongoing momentum events on the lead up to the conference in April. So whether you're attending the conference in Santa Marta or organizing locally, you can visit the global map of distributed events and become part of a growing worldwide push to make fossil fuel phase out politically inevitable. And that's what we want, as many of our incredible presenters today have talked about, is that we need the political will. Well, we're looking at each other. This is the community of the political will. And the more that we put pressure on our governments and also define what we mean by just transition, that's how we're going to get the future we want. So with that, I wanted to say that WECAN has been truly honored to have hosted a gathering of such remarkable presenters and to be with all of you who have joined us from literally around the world who are also doing incredible work in your own communities. Thank you all so much for joining us and for the work that you're doing and the fact that we do care so much about our future, about our planet, about our children, about life. Thank you. I also want to thank our 40 plus partner organizations for your wonderful support, and particularly a huge, huge thanks to the amazing interpreters and our phenomenal organizing team of Jacqueline Duncan, Ashley Guardado, Catherine Quaid, and Jillian Lyon. I really want to thank all of my incredible team for the effort that they put out to put on these events, which is many, many, many hours of organizing and lots and lots and lots of work. So thank you all so much, especially to my team for putting this together. Our goal is to keep building a global women's climate justice action movement. We will continue on with our fierce love for each other, our tender love for each other, all generations, and our earth. So thank you all so much for participating in this assembly and this collective work going onward. Onward we go. Onward we go. Thank you so much.